Welcome to the first Realm of Roses Plotcast. At very irregular intervals, we want to hear from the perspective of the Realm of Roses, process important plot developments and recaps for you to listen to, so that you can stay up to date even if you can't or don't want to attend a con. So this plotcast will extensively narrate what happened at the individual events. However, there are some disclaimers. Firstly, the summaries in the plotcast should not be seen as infallible truth. While we try to be as accurate as possible and to represent the events correctly, we all know that the story of Mythodea is multi-layered, complex, and sometimes confusing. Misunderstandings or misinterpretations become self-sustaining in the game and are considered the truth. Therefore, it is possible that you will hear things in the game that are quite different. Sometimes this may be a misinterpretation that still exists in the game, which we have corrected here. But of course, our information could also be wrong, even though we try to align our information with the organizers. So, in the game, don't necessarily insist that what you heard in the plotcast is the absolute truth. Instead, use such opportunities to create gameplay. Look for people who are there, do your own research, look at source texts, and stay in the game with others. This also leads to the second disclaimer. The summaries in the plotcast are not neutral. We try as best as we can to reflect the in-game perspective of the Realm of Roses, even if the text itself is not necessarily always in-game. For the sake of simplicity, we do not assume specific in-game roles here. That would only complicate things further. However, you can assume that informed residents of the Realm of Roses have obtained this information through rumors, public announcements, stories from warriors, etc. Feel free to come up with your own sources. This indirect representation also means that occasionally interpretations or opinions are hinted at. Mostly, this is the propaganda perspective, i.e. the interpretation that the crown provides. Informed residents are aware of this. Your character doesn't have to believe everything. And of course, we also tell things that were not intended to be made public at all. Third disclaimer. We do not tell deliberate lies or misinformation. In the first disclaimer, we said that we do not claim to be able to always represent everything correctly and truthfully. But what we definitely do not do is to provide false information that we know to be false. If there are things that are supposed to be found out in the game, then we don't talk about them at all or make hints. But for example, we never say Miro Klippenwald always acted faithfully to the elements, if Miro actually did secret things at the con that could be found out. Instead, it would be something like, although the Necker's Ray said everything was above board, there are rumors saying otherwise. Conversely, if we say Miro decided of his own free will to join the Circle of Redemption, you don't have to suspect that he might have been enchanted or something like that. We would have hinted at that. You might be wondering now, wait, what happened to find it out Ite? And indeed, nothing could be further from our intention as organizers than to stop play from happening. But we also believe that it should not be necessary to spend hours catching up on the events of previous cons, just to not be completely confused and lost at the con where you want to experience something. We also believe that secrets at cons are there to be uncovered. A secret that is uncovered brings gameplay for many people. One that remains secret is only for the person with the secret. And finally, here in the plotcast, we will never be able to present the same depth of plot and complex backgrounds as is possible at cons. The information you get here should therefore be more of an incentive for you to approach the respective characters or knowledge seekers in the game to find out more about the things that interest you. After all, in the summaries we focus on events that are important for the meta campaign. You still have to find out the details of Acheron's politics or the perspectives of other factions yourself. But enough of the preamble, it's time for the plot. In this first issue, we will cover the events from winter 2022-2023 to shortly before Conquest. So we'll cover the cons Sturmwacht 2 Under Siege, the Chronicles of Mythodea, and the Beyond the Seals. Issue 2 of the Plotcast, planned for shortly before the Chronicles, will then cover the remaining events up to that point. The Storm Knights, Conquest 2023, and the Saga of the Five Gods. Additionally, we will tell some events from the winter season that will lead to the Chronicles 2024. And so, for the first time in the Realm of Roses Plotcast, time in. The beginning of the year 1323. How often can one say a new era is dawning for this continent? In the case of Mythodea, far too often. More than 20 years after its rediscovery, after the opening of the seals, the destruction of the mirror world, and the cataclysm of the World Forge, it is happening again. Quite literally. The still hesitant contacts with Acheron and the Crimson Sails Company also brought a new era with them. We barely suspected the size of the world out there, beyond the mists of Mythodea. But in this year, the year 1323, we should sense it for the first time. We still felt that Mythodea, our new home, was dying. The worst catastrophes, droughts, earthquakes and storms, became rarer. But magic users throughout the country felt that the land's boundless power was slowly coming to an end. The Naimi also repeatedly warned that Mythodea was crying out for help. While the Archon traveled towards the northern border to secure it, especially in the north, some regions were only poorly protected due to Zackenberg's and Zweiwasser's withdrawal. A delegation led by the Nyame traveled to Castle Sturmwacht on Ghost Rock, where Acheron had again invited for diplomacy and celebrations. Sturmwacht 2, Under Siege. When the delegation reached Ghost Rock, they were immediately attacked by Skagen ships. The castle had been under siege for some time, and the news hadn't reached any of the guests. With no means of escape, the delegates from Mythodea had no choice but to take refuge in the crumbling castle walls. There, surrounded by hungry and intimidated Acheronians, they found refuge, and quickly it became clear that only a joint fight against the besiegers could save them all. Prince Alva of Acheron took command of the castle after his brothers, Crown Prince Anwin and Prince Godric, attempted to break the siege to fetch reinforcements. The next morning, their troops returned with sad news. Crown Prince Anwin had fallen. Prince Godric was severely wounded, and hope for rescue by Acheron seemed lost. The delegation from the Realm of Roses, from the Nyame herself to the court Wanda, helped where they could. Memories of Godric promised important knowledge. A ritual of the fairies promised the possibility of sending a saving falcon to the Acheronian fleet. And the presence of undead hinted that Garvan, their newly awakened king, wanted something from the Ghost Rock. Several sorties were fought, which also cost the life of Prince Finlay of Acheron, and his twin brother, the new Crown Prince Alva, was shaken and uncertain. Eventually, he accepted his responsibility for Acheron. But the situation was still serious. Protective spells on the castle gradually failed, supplies dwindled, and the planned ball either became a celebration of victory or a final moment of joy before the downfall. And then there was the matter of the book. Undead had repeatedly demanded a mysterious book, and after many riddles and counterspells, the settlers could discover what the real reason for the siege of Sturmwacht was. A diary of a traveler from Sarkhan, a land completely unknown at the time. The book was written in codes and foreign languages, leading to the assumption that Gavan himself had written it. It was only later realized that the writings were those of a researcher who had met Gavan on his travels. The settlers didn't have much time to decipher the book, though, because Gavan himself sent shades that forced the Nyami of the south to give the book to the undead. The settlers' desperate attempts to preserve the book were doomed to fail. But where the loss of the book weighed heavily on our shoulders, glimmers of hope gradually followed, turning luck in our favor. The enemy's plans to use large explosives were thwarted. A message, and thus the call for help, could be sent out. The siege ring could be broken and the enemy finally be repelled. The siege was over. And so, the evening ball was not a dance of the dead, but a lavish celebration of the living. There was dancing, celebrating, music playing, and in some dark back rooms, the ordeal was made. This also led to a selected group of settlers, including our Makakwa Raoul, being taken on a voyage beyond the mists on a ship of the Crimson Sails Company. Chronicles of Mythodea 2023. Especially those beings in the realm of roses who lived in harmony with nature received a call for help in the spring of the year 1323. The call didn't come from a single being, at least not in our conventional understanding, but from a forest. A Mora, a living forest, summoned warriors of the elements into the Halathian woods. It quickly became clear. Gavan and the rest of the Dark Alliance were already there and had entrenched themselves in a somewhat higher wooded area. The troops of the Southern Seal took it upon themselves to establish an outpost in the higher, evidently more dangerous forest, while the rest of the settlers settled in the much safer wooded area at the foot of the hill. There, only a small presence of the Black Dynasty was found, which had converted an old elemental temple into a crystal laboratory. But we could quickly drive them out and set about reconsecrating the temple. Not far from there, the druid Deirdre also found the starting point of the distress call. A forest heart, the center of the living forest, made itself known and began to speak with us. We learned how the old rulers had declared the Moras as old rulers against their will, and thus diminished them to something smaller according to their own understanding. We learned of a wound in the land, a rift in reality. To repair it, shards had to be retrieved from friends and foes alike. The healers and magehood of the Realm of Roses excelled here. Thanks to these efforts, the rift was eventually closed. We also learned from the forest heart that the upper forest was a second Mora, but it harbored a dark curse within it and was diseased. The troops of the south were taken over by the influence of the forest and attacked everyone, including us, who approached the forest. Only with a healing brew could this influence be dispelled. The recipe for this was found on site. We realized that we were not the first to whom the forest had asked for help. Scattered throughout the forest, we found reports of previous groups of heroes who had worked on a ritual to heal the forest, but ultimately failed. But we were to be successful. 5 components were found, consecrated, and formed into a spiritual connection between the lower and the upper forest hearts in an elaborate ritual. On the evening of the ritual, the upper forest heart also began to speak and told of the curse within it. Our cleverest minds drew the right conclusions, and so we could finally reconstruct what had happened. Gavan had researched immortality here before becoming the Undead King. He tried to create an artifact, a ring, and sacrificed 5 of his allies for it, and gave a part of his soul. We located Gavan's ring, managed to reach it with the remains of the allies, and cut him out of the forest and the dark shackles with a sword we had taken from an undead leader. So, We were able to retrieve the ring, but we would soon realize that Gavan had already regained the part of his soul from the ring before our arrival. Still, a victory. We had wrested the prize from the king of the undead. But the ring, as quickly became apparent, continued to corrupt its immediate surroundings. What should ultimately happen with the ring would be discussed at the convent, but until then, volunteers were needed to take care of it. After a short discussion, a pragmatic solution was agreed upon. The Realm of Roses had the shortest and safest route to the Convent of the Elements, had the capacity to secure the ring and research it, and so we took the ring into our care until the convent. A fateful decision, as it would turn out. But before we could return, it was necessary to restore the harmony of the forest. Here, too, our residents were there to help. With the Song of Harmony, the two forest hearts were brought into harmony and the story of the ailing forest came to a peaceful end. In the time before the convent. Because of its life-corrupting power, Gavan's ring was initially brought to the capital city Aschan by a mobile, well-protected troop led by Tiefenwacht. But it was clear it had to keep moving and be brought to the convent in Holzbrück in the south of the realm. To shake off possible pursuers, several diversionary troops were sent out from various fiefs, a wise decision as soon became apparent. For Gavan sent assassins, mostly the living who had fallen prey to the promise of immortality or the cure of a deadly disease, who attacked the troops. The troop with the real ring was eventually attacked as well, but they managed, with light losses and severe injuries, to reach Holzbrück, where they arrived on the first evening of the convent. Beyond the Seals 2023. The appearance of the heroic troop from several fiefs of the realm caused a stir among many participants of the convent. The ring was brought to the camp and secured in a relatively safe place by mages, so for the moment there was no great danger from it, at least no obvious one. The heroes of the troop recounted their experiences and shared their newly gained knowledge about handling the ring and containing it with the others. And after their worst wounds had been treated, it seemed that they could look forward to a quiet convent. And indeed, for a day the Realm of Roses could breathe, enjoy the festivities and attend important events such as the final admission of the elemental peoples to the ruling council. But then the letters reached us, and with them ominous news from home. Apparently, part of our communication routes was blocked, as we received messages from several days all at once. A somber silence spread in the camp of the Realm of Roses as the contents of the letters circulated. They were messages from the northern border. After the departure of the convent delegation, Undead had launched a surprise attack on almost the entire northern border of the Realm of Roses. Reports told of how large areas of land, including the former fiefs of Zackenberg and Aquehen, had been lost within a few days, and the Düstertrutz had been captured by the enemy. Archon Vincent bravely fought at the forefront and managed to hold back the undead before they could cross the river Heibel. At the same time, he called on the delegation of the Roses to solicit supports, troops, and above all, supplies at the convent. Thanks to the efforts of those present and the broad support of allies at the convent, replacements for the exhausted defenders and supplies for the impending long-term state of a war were quickly secured. Eventually another letter reached the convent. This time, however, not from our troops, but a message from the enemy. Levwin Lakehart, a commander of the undead, declared the conquest of the Düstertrutz and himself as the new commander of the northernmost fortress of the realm. The Nuame and the other members of the court decided to publicly read the letter before the realm, as a sign that they would not be intimidated by Gavan. But during the reading, assassins who had mingled within the audience struck. Many residents of the realm were severely injured, but miraculously no one was killed. This assassination attempt, as all present knew, like the entire war, was an act of intimidation by Gawain, and more a signal to the rest of the convent of what would happen to those who resisted him. But neither the courage of the Ram of Roses nor that of the other allies seemed to falter. It was quickly decided to entrust Gawain's ring to the Bay Cities, which volunteered for this purpose. And despite the attack on the Ram of Roses, the rulers decided to follow another lead. Gawain, according to news from the Freischar, seemed to be gathering his main force in the deep south at the ice wall, and dreams and visions suggested that something powerful was drawing energy from the land there and threatened to finally kill Mythodea. It was jointly decided that we would move there to stop whatever Gawain had planned. Another topic of the convent that had occupied the Realm of Roses was an artifact gifted to the Adelphi. It was a hammer that could deny access to magic to a being for a limited time. The Adelphi spoke before the ruling council to be appointed as the educating authority against any crimes of wasting magic. Only a few rulers agreed, and the outrage of most representatives of the various realms against the proposal of the magical folks met the Adelphi's angry departure from the council. Subsequently, there were many discussions about the sense and dangers of the artifact, and not all representatives of the realm were of the same opinion. Angry Adelphi spoke at the court, and even Larel and Gaheris, longtime friends of the Nechus Ray, tried to advocate for the use and proposal of the Adelphi. Miro Klippenwald, however, finally announced a promise that the hammer would not be used against residents of the realm, and that a judgment on possible waste of magic would continue to be pronounced by the Court of Roses. This led to a tense relationship between the Adelphi and the Realm of Roses, but further discussions, especially led by the Niame and the Tulhen, prevented further escalation for the time being. On the last evening of the convent, a disturbing vision reached the camp of the Niame of the south. 3 sisters appeared, apparently embodiments of Mythodea and 2 other living continents, one of which, it was assumed, was the already deceased Greenland. The 3rd sister, the only one of the 3 who could express herself, urged the Niame and her closest followers to seek her out. This was the Bird of the Heart Seekers, a new group that no longer belonged to the south and would go its own way. Do you remember how the Macaquois set out on a journey beyond the mists? He and the other guests of the Crimson Sails Company have of course returned, and told many stories of how vast the world beyond the mists really was. We also got to see the map for the first time, although it was heavily censored. Amidst all the excitement and concern, there were also the beautiful events of the convent. With the dance ball and the competition of harmony, the Realm of Roses once again brought high culture to the convent. The winner of the harmony competition is Merane from the Fortress of Diversity. A large group of brave and clever children managed to gather enough strength to consecrate the foundation stone of Shekara, a great ritual for our youngest heroes. The Thornstorm, our Pomfball team, had once again fought a respectable but ultimately unsuccessful competition. The winners were once again Viribus Unitis from the north. Finally, on the last evening, there were momentous decisions on the sidelines of the events. The Order of the Grey Souls had taken in the prisoners of the Circle of Redemption. Over a year ago, the sanctuary of the Nechus Ray, the Herzensruhe, was destroyed, and the deeds of the Circle had contributed to it. Especially for those Circle members whose children had been in the care of the Order since the events of the previous year, Shelo of the Grey Souls spoke before them and begged for mercy. At the end of the convent, Miro Klippenwald announced his decision. He granted mercy, especially to those who showed remorse, but also pronounced a death sentence. Thus, the convent came to an end. Everywhere there was singing and celebration, one could say, as always at the convent. But for many residents of the realm, their thoughts were already at home with their loved ones, for everyone knew they would return to a realm at war. Battles, decisions, and blows of fate awaited them all. This concludes our first Plotcast. We hope you enjoyed it. For this first issue, we focused on the general events and refrained from most domestic matters. If you are interested in something like appointments of new dignitaries of the realm, or relationships between the fiefs and allies of the realm, we can also include that in future Plotcasts. However, we would rely on your help for that. It is difficult enough to keep track of all official plot events. For internal events of the fiefs and groups of the realm, we would need information from you. Feel free to share your opinion with us, you know how to reach us. Tune in next time when we summarize the Storm Knights once again and then focus on the extensive events of the Conquest and the Saga of the Five Gods. At this point, many thanks to our wonderful community who make this world exciting and alive. Many thanks to all helpers who pitch in wherever they are needed. Many thanks to all who helped create the Plotcast, translators, speakers and authors. If you want to be part of it yourself, let us know, and otherwise, see you next time. Time out.